Hi, I'm Lizzie Harper. My website is www.lizzieharper.co.uk, and today I thought I'd do another video. It's been a while, so I thought today maybe we would have a look at drawing cherry blossom with a little bit of focus on dealing with painting white flowers, because you're painting a white flower and the paper is white. What are you going to do? So I'll give you a few suggestions, and we'll work through it. Looking forward to it. So a note on equipment before we begin. The watercolour paper, I draw straight onto my watercolour paper. Some people push through or prepare it, or use tracing paper to come together with compositions, which is really a very good move, but I'm going to draw straight. This is Fluid 100. I really like it. It's a very smooth surface, hot press. But I did hear recently that if you put masking tape on it, it will tear very easily. So there are, as with everything, drawbacks. I'm going to be drawing today with my trusty Pentel 205, which is this mechanical pencil. And also with this one, which has been recommended to me by somebody, which is a, what is it? It's a Pentel 120A3. So that's got an 0.3 nib, not an 0.5 nib. Hand lens, you need a hand lens whenever you're doing botanical illustration so that you can get in on the details. Cherry blossom, obvs. Rubber I use is a Factis, which is nice and soft. This is my paint box, so it's a mix of Winsor & Newton mostly. And the paint brushes I use are my trusty, oh, you can't see, but never mind, Winsor & Newton Series 7 Kolinsky Sable, and it's always a number 1 that I use. So now that's everything got together, and I've gone and picked my cherry blossom illegally. So we'd better get started. Okay, so I've chosen the cherry blossom that I want, and I'm drawing it up, and I'm using this mechanical Pentel pencil. That a little bit too big, but it doesn't really matter. A lot of times with the films that I make, people have asked me to include this step, the drawing step, so I thought I would today. If I was less of a confident drawer, I would almost certainly be putting a few plot lines in, sort of suggesting where the different parts were going to go. So these wild cherries, I don't know if you can actually see the drawing. You can't really. Let's see if I can focus in on it a little bit. There we go, that'll help a bit. So there's a little guideline there for the center of the flower, but generally I don't use those so much. It's one of those things, the more you do it, the more comfortable you are with it, and the less kind of backup you need, I guess. So this goes behind there, folds over just there, goes into this central structure. So this is the wild cherry. It's Prunus Avium, I think. There are several cherries, and there's also some confusion because in America there's a cherry. Let me start. Sorry, it made no sense at all. I was concentrating on the drawing, not on my right. So now I've got these basic shapes in here, and I'm going to draw this coming out here. Can you see it comes out on a long stalk? Now, because this is mostly going to be about talking about painting white flowers, I'm not going to do too much. I'm not going to put too much detail in, but we need to have quite a few bits and pieces. So can you see what I'm really doing is I'm just looking at the subject all the time and seeing where the edges are. I mean, there was an art teacher who told me once that there's no such thing as an edge, which is kind of right. An edge is just where something curls away from our ability to see it, curls out of sight, I guess. I try and remember that, especially with curved things. But we need to have edges, otherwise we don't know what we're looking at. So I'm finding where the edges are, just plotting them in, trying to think to a certain extent where the bigger structure of the flower is. So does it curve or does it go round? So let me move this bit more under the line of fire. we go. They all have 5 petals, these flowers, but except for this one. Oh yes, it does have 5 petals. Look at that. I drew it totally wrong. That is bad, man. I just didn't even see that that was there. Dear me. And the 5th petal is under there. And putting these, which are all very recurved. They all curve backward on themselves. And then it's always important, where do those petals attach? You see, they don't attach in the middle of each of. They come up between, can you see? So plot that in. Okay. And 3 comes up from here, kind of crashes into the other flower. That's okay, I don't mind. It's welcome to do what it wants. Growth patterns, you've got to respect them. Oh, and I've actually slightly changed the angle. Oh, Lizzie, this is the thing. When you hold your specimens, you often change the angle without meaning to, which can be annoying. Okay, that one does that, and then this one comes out from here. Is it still on the... If I move it up a bit. Okay. So you can see I'm literally just drawing in the individual shapes, looking at it all the time. So you're meant to look at the subject that you're drawing 80% of the time and look at the page about 20%, and that's probably more or less what I do, because the second you stop looking at what you're drawing at, you no longer really interpret it correctly, I don't think. I think that might have come out too wide. So in order to not just fill this entire film with me drawing cherry petals, I think what I'll do now that I've shown you a bit of the basics, is that on the drawing, is I'll do a bit more plotting in, and then we'll do a bit more drawing together before we get on the colours. Just got to see where things are in comparison to one another. That's why making the first mark is always so scary. Once you got the first mark on, you're fine. That goes there. Yeah, you're absolutely fine, but it's getting the first mark, because once you've got the first mark, then you can put everything else in relation to it, you see. I'll tell you what, I will stick with it. I'll keep recording just for this, for the middle bit. So these flowers, these cherry flowers, oh, they're not, you silly girl. They're hermaphrodite, which means they have male and female parts. So in the middle, that pale green circle that I've just drawn there, the top, you can only see the top of it. That's the stigma, the top of the female part. So at the base of the stigma, you got the ovaries and 2 ovules, one of which will be fertilized, all going according to plan, and will later produce the nut, the cherry seed. And these filamentous things coming out here. So look, same again. So you've got this big, slightly thicker area in the middle. There you go, that's the stigma. And what happens is this bit on top, that's where pollen lands. And the pollen burrows, literally burrows down all the way into the heart down here, which is where you've got the ovules and the ovary. And that's where it'll fertilise the seeds. That's super cool, that is. And they're very clever. A lot of plants have ways of making sure they don't pollinate themselves, because you don't get much genetic mixing if you end up being self-pollinating. Anyway, so these long filamentous bits here, the little blobs on top, the little pale blobs on top, these are the stamens. And the blobs on top are the anthers, which produce the pollen. So there we go. So you can see you've got the... But if you have a little think when you're drawing, what is this that I'm drawing? What is this structure? Then often the drawing will be improved for it, because instead of just drawing a furry blob of mess in there, you're thinking, okay, well, so that's the stigma and the pistil, and these are the anthers. And also knowing how many of each of these things, you can do a bit of research before you start drawing. That always helps as well, knowing how many anthers. And there's mostly just one stigma and so on. Right, I'm going to do a bit more drawing and then I'll come back. So you can see I've drawn up most of this sprig now. All we have to do is put in the twig that it's being borne on by, is that in focus? Now it is. It's not shielded by the leaves. So you see, we've drawn this up, and in fact I've done a couple of bits of lying and you'll see why later. It's very hard to not rotate it as you draw it. That's why as soon as you draw it, you can almost map it out and keep things on the steady. But this leaf doesn't actually come up at this angle. The reason I've done it is because of something we're going to be doing with painting whites in a few minutes. So there we are. That's the pencil drawing done. Stage 1 completed. So I've mixed up the green of the leaves. I'm going to do the leaves first. Well, I always do the leaves first because they're a little bit more boring than doing the flowers. But also because it's going to help us when you come to drawing the white flowers. If you look carefully at the leaves here, they've only just come out and they're very, very fresh. They're not bright green. You think, oh, a leaf is bright green, but if you look closely, put that paint box out the way, they're really not bright green at all. They're sort of a very reddish green. They've still got a lot of the red pigmentation, which will fade as they get older, and then obviously come back when autumn comes. Well, it's not that. It's the chlorophyll. The green comes on strong in the summer and then disappears, gets sucked back into the tree in autumn, revealing the red colours that were there all along. Anyway, so this green that I've mixed up is a very kind of yellow green. So it's a mixture of this one, which is a cobalt green, I think. Tiny bit of sap green. This is a sort of golden green colour. I'm not really sure what it's called. Oh, I'm so bad with my colours, aren't I? And that's a yellow ochre. And then I've also, just to give it the redness, which is echoed in the red pigment, I've added some of this alizarin crimson. So that's the colour we've got. Again, because it's a film, I'm, you know, and we're to a certain extent on time limits, I'm not going to do a nice polished finished illustration. But it should give you some idea. Let's try and zoom in. What leaf should we do? Well, we're definitely going to do this leaf. Okay, so using my trusty paintbrush, which seems to be losing a hair, which is always annoying. And I'm just going to paint, keeping the pattern of it logical, this side of the veins. Plotting in my, I always used to say it was my darkest darks. It's not my darkest darks. I think somebody who watches my films, Iris, pointed out to me, they're not your darkest darks. They are your mid-tones, and she's completely correct. But anyway, if you pick those out first, then you'll be able to have a roadmap to go on. It's important to get the light right. The older I get, and I'm ancient as the hills now, the older I get, the more important it is to have proper lighting. So I've invested in a decent daylight lamp and in all sorts of off-the-shelf reading spectacles. I'm already incredibly short-sighted, but now I'm also incredibly long-sighted. Great, thanks for that. That works so well. Still, I should be grateful. I'm lucky to be able to see it all, right? Okay, so literally we're just picking in the shadows here, and I'm going to add some red to the top of this leaf to echo the I can't remember off the top of my head what that red pigment is called, but you can see it here. Lots of leaves you can see it with when they come out in spring. In hazel, you get to see the sort of the purplish red blotches on the young leaves, which they seem to fade, but it's not that. I think it's the chlorophyll coming up and masking that pigment. Okay. So focusing on the lights and darks, just laying down a bit of colour. So what can I tell you about this plant, this cherry tree? So they grow on alkaline soil, which is kind of chalky, and they're very common in Britain. They are loved by birds, especially in the autumn, because they produce these gorgeous, bright sort of scarlet cherries. And this this sprig here, the material I've taken is from a tree which is growing just up the road from me, and in autumn it is full of blackbirds and starlings pecking away and eating all the cherries and leaving kind of nothing but pips on the floor and stuff. And the fruit, I mean, it's edible, certainly edible. Sorry, that's very negative. It is edible. It's definitely edible, but it is very bitter. It's got an astringent taste to it. But it's the forerunner. I mean, it's this wild cherry is what everybody, let's zoom in a bit more, shall we? See if that helps. Woo! It's what most, you know, it's what a lot of current domesticated cherries, the rootstock is still wild cherry. And
And people could do all sorts of things with the fruit. So you can make it into cherry brandy, and you can eat the fruit straight. You can make cough syrups out of it. But yeah, the birds absolutely love it. Right, so just working into... I'm hardly going to put any green on the tip of this leaf, because can you see the tip of the leaf is almost entirely sort of crimsony red. Now I'm going to put a bit back here. And again, now I'm going to tell you why I've moved this leaf, because you can see as well as I can, that leaf is not behind this flower. Oh, no, it isn't. So why would I have lied? Well, that is to do with painting whites. So one of the easiest ways that you can paint a white is by putting something behind it. So you've got the white of the page and you've got the white of the flower, and you want the flower to show up. So the very easiest thing you can do is pop a leaf there. Obviously, biologically, you've got to be a bit careful with that. So down here, for example, there's no way I could put leaves in, because these leaves wouldn't be, at this point, with the blossom being so young and the leaves not coming out at the same time as the blossom, you wouldn't have a full array of leaves that reaches that low. But up on this blossom, we can get away with it, even though it's not entirely true, because biologically it's still potentially accurate. So yeah, so your number one way of painting flowers is to put something behind them. So, what was I going to say? Yeah, so things like dormice and mice, they like the cherries as well, and they'll crack the stones open to get to the seed inside. Hawfinches, which are a British species of bird, they do the same thing, although I've never seen any hawfinches on our little cherry tree in Hay on Wye, but there we go. They're very good for pollinating insects, so they're sort of alive with bees. Even today, it's a very gloomy day here. It's quite cold. It's April, but it's absolutely... there's an Arctic wind going on. It's very unseasonal. But even today, the bees are out doing their stuff and pollinating away. And there's something very cool about these cherry trees as well, which is the leaves. I'll see if I can show you later on. I'll try and do a bit of anatomy. The leaves have little, on the leaf stalks, petioles, or they have two little glands at the base of each leaf, and they're kind of red, and the stems of the leaves are red as well, actually. But these little glands, some scientists think that what they do is they attract insects to the cherry, but they don't attract insects to pollinate the cherry. Oh no, they attract predators of the insects that like to feed off the cherry. So there are various species of butterflies and moth who like the cherry leaves, and aphids and all that kind of stuff. And so perhaps these little red glands at the base of the leaf stalks attract the predators of those things, like hoverflies perhaps, then ladybird larvae. I would say ants, but then of course ants don't do that. Ants tend aphids, stroking them with their antenna, and they farm them like we farm, I don't know, sheep or something. Anyway, I don't know if aphids and cherry have anything to do with each other. I've gone off on a tangent again. I do apologise. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to finish this leaf, and then we'll get on to the next stage. So I've plotted in most of my leaves, and now I'm going to mix up a slightly yellower top wash, so that same green as before, but with a little bit of yellow in it. Let me show you the colour. You see, it's yellower, a bit greener than that. And then I'm making that quite liquid. I've also got to figure out what angle my leaves are at. Come on, Lizzie, focus. Where are your two flowers? I don't even know which way round I'm holding it anymore. Of course, everything droops. There we go. There we go. That's the angle right again. So using this yellow, I mean, yeah, got to be a bit careful, because at this time of year, there's also a lot of shine on these leaves because they're so fresh and just coming out. So I'm going to plot this in. I'm going to leave white on this side of the vein, the inner side of the vein. And you see I'm avoiding filling it in completely. But this really is the colour of the leaves. And then I'll add the red on top of that. So and always when you're painting leaves, it's worth putting a little bit of extra emphasis on the teeth, on the perimeter of the leaf. Because the eye sees them as darker, so you help the eye along with its interpretation, I guess. And these cherry leaves, they're, like I said, they're kind of oval. When they unfurl, they're oval. And they have teeth, serrated margin, which always points slightly forward towards the point of the leaf. So that's that one done. And then this one, same treatment. A little bit of yellow, looking at, that's weird, okay. Looking at your specimen all the time. It's right here, I'm holding it. Is my hand in spasm yet? Yes, my hand's in spasm. Does it matter? No, because it's all for the greater good. I always do this. I always hold my specimen. There are very clever systems of clips and tubes and things that you can get to hold your specimen still, which also help because you don't then rotate your specimen all the time like I do, which is annoying. Do it without meaning to. And I'm not going to, I have got some, but I end up just holding it. It just feels so much easier because then you can get it in and out of focus, bring it closer to you as and when. But it does mean that your hand cramps up. That is true. Okay. Now what am I going to do? So I've done that and I've done that. I think I'm going to put a much paler, waterier top wash. This is where the whites disappear, and that's okay. I'm ready for them to go because I'm using such a pale wash that it really still allows the difference in tone to shine through. I'll put a wash on him as well, just as a kindness. Yeah. It's always stressful when you do these demos because as you paint, you suddenly think, oh gosh, this one isn't going so well. You always have the moment of crisis. It's like, oh, great. So here I am trying to tell people how to do this. And in fact, you can barely do it yourself. Ha! Chancer. So I've done all of this stuff here, where everything's come out of its, the shells of its buds, I guess. And they're quite flushed with red as well. I've also done the twig. So the twig is a really pretty kind of pale grey colour. And so I made that colour by mixing a crimson, a tiny bit of a tiny bit of yellow ochre, blue crimson, tiny bit of yellow ochre, and a touch of green. And oh, for goodness sake, get into focus. I'm going to put a top wash on that as well. A yellowish top wash, I think, looking at it. I'm going to do that now. There you go. And then we're going to, there we go, that's better. Maybe even a bit stronger. That's going on really wet. Okay, and that can dry while we look at these leaves. So the red, even though it looks quite red, you don't really want it to be in your face red. So what I've done is I've used, I've thrown my paintbrush on the floor, is I've used alizarin crimson, and can you see I'm mixing in the green that we used for the leaves to knock it back a little bit. So it's kind of brownish really, but it also reads as crimson. So it'll have something to do with the rest of the colouring of the leaves. Okay, so this is got to concentrate here. Because the red, if you look at it, the red is particularly condensed around the teeth of the leaf and around the tip as well. So I don't want to make the whole thing red, because then that will lose all the delicacy of it. And I'm only going to do this with one leaf on film because it'll be the same for all of them. Do that. Bring that down and round. You're really just outlining in crimson, aren't you, if you think about it? And that leaf has got more. There's more crimson all the way down. Crikey, there really is. So I'm going to use the veins to help me do that. There we go. And can you see, the more detail we put into this leaf, the more stark and white and pretty those are blossoms look. It's very clever. You use the background to throw the flower into the foreground. And in fact, the I mean, it's one of the identifying characteristics of the cherry, but the stalk is red, but so too is the underside of the midrib. So we need to get that in. I don't know if it is later in the season. That'd be worth knowing. I don't know. And again, likewise, we've got here the stalk of the leaf, and there, that little bump there, that's what I was talking about with the on the leaf stem, those little bumps, those glands, which are again a distinctive characteristic of the species. Or most of the cherries, I think, have them. I was going to say all. Then I'm always anxious on these films if I say all, like I know something when I don't, that somebody's going to come along and say, you know nothing, you heathen. Yeah, and same again. Can you see them here? They're quite clear here. Little red glands. Whoops, I really messed that up. If you're doing a straight line, look where you're going rather than at the tip of your brush. Helps. And I'm still using that same mix. This leaf is actually less red than the other one, so I'm going to use yet less of our little anchoring technique. That'll run out down here, come a bit more to the front here, and then I'll do the teeth like this. Trying not to mess everything up as I go along. So literally I'm just doing the downside of each tooth, can you see? Outlining it in red. Well, it's brown, let's be honest. Okay. There's a lot more of it up here in the shadow. Okay, so right now it looks a bit weird, but now we're going to go in with a paler version and add a bit of a wash, pull out those colours. It's quite a sketchy effect, actually. It's not all crisp, but hopefully it'll work. Yeah, that's that sort of thing. And again, anchoring your wet paint in the outside margin of the leaf. Looking at that leaf as much as you can to make sure you don't lose track of the reality of your subject matter. There we go. And same on this side. This leaves much redder, so slightly thicker mix. Not far off what we used to do the original outline. And you see, just backing up those marks that I made. A bit waterier. And there we go. I did before doing this film, I did a bit of research into cherries, and I've written it all on a nice sheet of paper. I thought, oh, I'll be able to tell them all sorts of fascinating facts about the cherry as I go along. But of course, when you're painting, you're looking at your painting, you're not looking at your sheets of notes. So a lot of good that's done me. There we go. I've more or less finished all these leaves now. They're flushed with red. They look more or less okay. Now, white flowers. So we've already discussed how you can throw a white flower forward by putting green leaves and foliage and things behind it. But obviously there are some times when that can't be done. So the next one that we're going to, there are different techniques. One is leaving the pencil as an outline, which I do quite a lot. Another is using paint to pick out the outline, which again works. And yet another is putting an almost invisible background wash to throw it forward. So I think what we'll do, I might even label them, if we just use these two as the pencil one, and then this one here I'll do in watercolour and erase the pencil, and then these two I'll practice what I was talking about, that watercolour wash. But the first thing you have to do when you're painting white flowers, before you do anything else, is you have to make sure that your paint box is clean. It's not. And you have to make sure that the water you're using is clean. It's not. So let me go and sort that out. So I'm not going to lie to you. I just had a real struggle trying to mix up what I call a neutral, a colour that we can paint the white blossom with. So what I ended up coming up with is this very kind of nondescript blue. So it's a mix of cerulean up here, that's a couple, so ultramarine, and a tiny touch of this, which I think is Purple Lake, and I'm going to have to use it very light. Now you can mix neutrals, which are sort of flat greys. You can get a neutral tint, but I don't like those colours. You can mix neutrals by using opposite colours on the colour spec, on the colour wheel, like purple with a yellow, red with a green, but that wasn't really working out with this. The trick is to keep the colour really light. Anyway, we're going to work on in now, holding the blossom, sturdy blossom in hand, and just looking for your lights and darks. Remember, these are the ones that we're leaving with the pencil, but there's still a certain amount of differentiation, lights and darks. But can you see, I mean, on the paintbrush, in the paint box, that paint looked almost non-existent. It looked like it almost wasn't there. But here, now we're applying it to the flower, it looks almost quite dark. So just look, this is, again, nature is very unkind. The second you stop concentrating on looking, it will make it very clear that you've made a mistake. So it really is a case of looking and continuing to look at your subject all the time. Try and get those nuances of shade in. And obviously when you have one petal overlapping another, that's quite a relief, because you know that that's going to be a little bit darker. There, you can just plop that in like that. And if you don't put these in, then it's really weird. I mean, it's very minimal what you're doing, but if you don't put it in, then the flower just doesn't really register as a flower. Sometimes the shadow is heavier on the outside perimeter, but sometimes it really isn't. Quite often with these white flowers, the very outside of the edge of the petal is pale as pale can be. So then you have to work within from that. You know, and we all make mistakes. So that line just there, let's see if I can focus in a bit so you can see what I'm talking about a bit more. So this line just here, this one, that's far too blunt. That's going to look rubbish, but there's not a lot I can do about it now, so I'm just going to let it go. Try not to weep too much. What else? Looking at the flower. So here again, there's quite a heavy shadow where this overlaps. That's darker. We're not doing anything with the stamens or the stigma or any of that stuff, not yet. That's dark on the outside edge. And always when you're painting, follow the line of growth. So with these, it's quite easy because you can see the veins of the flowers. They show up because they're, I guess they show up because they're possibly they protrude slightly. And if they do that, then they cast a shadow. So you can see them. Okay, and just plotting in some of this detail, and you do sort of need to get it right, because if you get it wrong, there's not a great deal you can do about it. So you need to, I mean, what might help is if you're not feeling confident, you might want to do a pencil sketch first to figure out where your lights and darks are, because it isn't one of those things you can kind of guess at. As you can see, I'm just looking at the plant and I'm a bit like, wow, so how come that's got a shadow and how come that hasn't? Okay, working into the shadows a bit more. This last one, this is all creased up on itself, so that's not very helpful either. But can you see it gives a kind of substance, something of a substance to the flower. These flowers are very nice, actually. They smell very slightly of almonds, which we like. And actually, I've just realised something, because on my notes, it told me that all parts of the cherry except for the fruit have got, I'm even going to refer to my notes now, have got cyanogenic glycosides in. Cyanogenic sounds like cyanide. And what do we have in apple pips? Cyanide, which is in the same family as the wild cherry. So no surprise there. Okay, now I'm going to move on to the next flower using that same mix. I'm not going to play about with that one. It took me so long to come up with it that I'm loath to do anything novel with it. So yeah, so if the plant's full of cyanogenic glycosides, which are like sugars, what are those caterpillars doing eating it? Very clever. Oh, nature keeps on giving, doesn't it? Never get any good answers. You don't get the answers. Every answer that you get just prompts you to have more questions. That's what I love about biology in general. You never get to the end of the questions, and the questions keep coming and they just get more and more wonderful. Okay. So you can see we're using really delicate touch here. And just looking at that blossom all the time to make sure we don't mess up. I mean, with these, you can always choose what colour to stick with. So I could have made it slightly pinker. I didn't want to, but I could have done. But I was trying as hard as possible to be entirely true to my subject. Here, that's got quite a sharp shadow. And that is also a sharp shadow. So we're going to have to work on that to make that clear. But what I'd say is certainly keep your painting on the petals minimal, accurate, and very, very light. Less is definitely more when it comes to painting white flowers. They're so delicate, they're so pretty. So they were saying in most of the stuff I was reading, it's saying that in Japan, obviously, cherry blossom has been a massive thing, and the cherry blossom trees and all that, literally for a couple of thousand years, maybe even longer. But in Europe, it's a really recent thing. It's really only in the last 200 years that anybody's bothered to import cherry blossom and to grow ornamental cherries. Cherries. It's literally 200 years. Seems weird, doesn't it? I think there was something very complicated about Henry VIII's gardener reintroducing a wild cherry tree from Flanders. But why would it be being reintroduced? And how do they know? I mean, that was back in the 1570s, 1580s. I can't remember my monarchy dates anymore. Queen Elizabeth I died of blood poisoning in 1603. I do know that. These ones again, just plotting in those darkest darks, not going too heavy. So this is really the internals of the flowers, right? So the internals of the flowers. I was going to say what you need to do is keep it light. Have I kept it light? No. Always have loo paper to do blotting with, toilet paper at hand. Excellent. Okay, I've saved the day, I think. So yeah, the inside of the flowers, just don't do too much to. Keep it nice and light. I've lost this flower now. It's rotated when I panicked and put it down. I'm also still thinking about Queen Elizabeth I, which doesn't help anything really. But the outside edges, that's really what we're going to be discussing, is how to deal with them. This pencil outline we're leaving. With this one, what we're going to do is, again, using a similar colour to what we just used for our neutrals, which was various blues with a touch of purple. A little bit darker. So look, I'll show you what I've mixed up. You see? So again, I'm going to dilute that a little bit more. To get a paler colour in watercolour, you dilute it by adding water, and to get a darker colour, you add more colour. You add more sort of body colour, more paint. So this one, we're doing painting in the outline. So again, you need a steady hand here to have the courage of your convictions. Very light paint stroke. And literally just painting around the outside. If you go too heavy, it's going to look really, really rubbish. So you have to be real careful with this technique. Again, I suppose it ties in with what I was saying earlier about there's no such thing as edges. Just need to make sure you get all of it in. And then we're going to wait for it to dry. A little bit of echoing because it's quite a dark line, so you don't want it to just stand out. But can you see it stands out a little bit more? These ones are pencil we're leaving. Now these ones down here, what should we do? Should we do a green? Yeah, I think we'll do a green. So what I'm going to do now is mix up a monumentally pale green. So pale. I'm going to get the colour right first. Ah! Yes, see the pale green. It's not a pale green. Fool. I'm going to get rid of most of that. And I'm going to add a little bit more yellow so that it's got something to do with the foliage. So can you see it really is so close to just water? And what we're going to do is, using loo paper, toilet roll, I'm going to go around the edge, the outside edge. God, I hate doing this. Okay. So you saw how close to water that was, but can you see how clear this is? How it really makes the edges of the leaves, where the petals jump out at you. But, as I'm sure you will not hesitate to tell me, you do not want a line there. So what we do is, using pure water, we pull it out. Pull, quickly. And then blot the edges. Pulling with a sort of gentle outward motion. Outward motion. So hopefully you won't be able to see the edge of this green wash. And you do have to do it quite fast, has to be said. Because if you spend too long panicking about it, then the bits that you've gone around the edges of will set, and you don't want that to happen. Again, that water, adding that water. And doing, again, that thing of slightly pulling out so you don't have any sharp edges. What you really don't want at this point in time is any paint or anything on your piece of tissue, because that really is the end of it. There's a bit of a tide mark there. Okay, so when we come to rub out the pencil line, you probably won't really see that too clearly. I'm going to do a little bit more on this side. I'm going to put a tiny bit more colour in this time, because that really was very gentle. Yeah, you're still with me. So just around the outside. Lay it down. And again, you're going to need a decent paper to do this. If you have a rubbishy, low quality paper, it may well not allow you to play around like this. So always give yourself a chance by getting the best materials that you can afford. It's one of my bugbears, especially with children doing art at school. I mean, it's not the school's fault, but quite often they'll be given such rubbish art equipment. I feel like saying, and also those magazines. Oh my goodness. So children get given magazines where the things that they're meant to colour in are printed on china clay paper. So it's like really shiny. And then they're like, the felt tips they're given are really rubbish anyway. And you're like, yeah, that child is really, really going to be able to make something really artistically beautiful there. Anyway, so that's, is that dry? Yeah. So that's those techniques. And what I'm going to do now, hopefully it's dry, oops, is if we rub out the pencil here. I'm not going to do it with the watercolour washes because they're going to take longer. Oh, sorry. Okay, so it's quite a blotchy edge, can you see? So I'll probably almost with no paint on the brush at all. Yeah. Fill in the spaces. There you go. So there we go. So that's outline in paint. This is outline in pencil. This is the background wash. And this also is using a piece of leaf behind. I'm now going to work into the rest of the flowers, and I'll be back once I've plotted in the other ones. Right, so I've gone round the edges of the flowers. I've done them in different ways. So these ones, as you know, we had the background wash. This one up here, that was what do you call it? I painted the edges. And I think I did with that one as well. And I've started putting in the stem. So this is just super quick. It's a yellowish green that I've mixed. Yep. And getting the stems in for the flowers, really important, but it's actually really, really easy. So literally where they come out from somewhere, you colour in the whole area. And then you take it to a single line. Single line. Bulk it up a little bit more here, the underside of the ovary. There we go. And picking out the red bits of these sepals which have reflexed and curved back on themselves. Not the red bits. This is green. It's the most opposite colour that you can find. Oh my goodness, I need to go back to colour school. So yeah, so that's what we do, and then we let that dry, and then literally just add a little bit of water to that green, make it much more dilute. Pop a wash of that on top. See over here? Maybe I ought to zoom in a bit. Hang on. So literally we've just done that. This one's a bit clunky, isn't it? There we go. And on this side, same thing. I'm not doing the one I just did with just now because it won't be dry yet. I want it to be dry more or less. Follow the line of the stem back to its source. And here again. Steady hand, light touch. Even then you'll find you go over the edge like I have done there. Silly child. Okay, there you go. And sometimes if you're doing a straight line, it helps to not breathe. Okay, now we can do this one that I did just now. Okay, then I'm going to let those dry, and once they're dry, I'm going to pick out the red. I've rubbed out most of the pencil here, and you can see in places it's still not very distinct. So what I'm doing now is with a slightly darker, only slightly darker green, doing this again, and then literally getting water, blending, 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 blending. Don't want any sharp edges. Yeah, that's right. And then you can get a blot as well, and that just pulls those bits that aren't quite in focus into focus. Keep tweaking it. I mean, you don't want it to look like it's bright green behind the flowers, but at the same time you want that background wash to have done its trick and to have made the petals stand out. The stalks. So I've put the red on most of the stalks. I've left just this one down here. Again, the stalks are very, very easy. Don't even know if they need a special bit. So you just have to look at where the red is. And with this one, the red is down here. Tiny bit up there. So a tiny bit of outlining. And then a little bit down here. That's a funny old shape. You need to make sure that doesn't go wrong. And then it's flushed on these curved back sepals. Just plotting it in. around here. Excellent. Before the paint set, using a little bit of clean water to move it around so it's less in your face. Soften it, I think, is a nice way of putting it, Lizzie. Okay, and let that dry, and then we'll add some purple. Meanwhile, let's pull the edges of this together, so they're quite sharp, the edges here, so literally you're outlining them. Doing a bit there. Anchor these to where they came from, in amongst the heart of all of this stuff. A few little shadows, never go wrong with a shadow. I just realised I was painting where you can't see. I do apologise for that. Okay, now the middle of the flowers. So what do? We've got to mix up a nice... I'm going to still stick with this kind of yellowish green that we've still got from... God, I can't even remember. Was that the background? I think that was the background wash. But with a little bit more green in it. I'm adding a tiny bit of cobalt green to that. Now is the time, my friend, to get out your magnifier and your forceps and really get into the heart of this flower. I mean, I've taken one apart already, but you need to figure out what is going on. So we've got in here one stigma, and I'm just going to outline the top of it, the pistil. Ah, that's a stamen. I blame the drawer. I blame the person who drew this thing in the first place. That'll be me. Okay, that's fine. Okay. And also thinking about it, because the base of all these, the stamens and the anthers and the ovaries and stuff, they're all down in amongst here, so you might want to bring a little bit of green into play in amongst the base of these petals. Only a bit though. Don't want to overdo it. Okay, a bit more yellow for the stamens, but not a lot. And literally you're just outlining each of these processes. So unless I'm much mistaken, I'll check my notes. But there should be 5 petals, there should be 10 stamens, I think. One ovary with 2 ovules, one of which becomes a seed. I don't even know if I've given you the Latin name of this flipping flower. So this is Prunus Avium, which in Britain and in Europe is the wild cherry. And in America, Prunus Avium refers to a different species, which is the bird cherry. And I think in America you call your there's also what we call the bird cherry in America. I think you might call Prunus serotina. Okay, and then a bit more yellow. So you can tell the difference, because the bird cherry in the autumn produces black fruit, and this one produces very blatantly scarlet cherries. They look like cherries. They look like the cherries that you buy in a shop, but much smaller. There we go. Cherry wood. What can I tell you about cherry wood? Cherry wood, if cherry could. Cherry wood is kind of very pretty when it's used for musical instruments and veneers, things like that. And the bark. Oh, I haven't said about the bark. So the bark is kind of greyish and it peels off sometimes in horizontal strips. I'm going to mix up a pale yellow now for the anthers. So that's Naples yellow, which is a bit too warm. I'm going to knock it back with a bit of green. Yeah, and so it produces, it's got bark which sometimes peels off horizontally, and lots of lenticels, which are little pores. They look like little sort of spots on the bark. You can even see them on the twigs, actually. And they're sort of how the bark breathes. Your lenticels, and then it produces gum, which it uses almost like a kind of, I guess, like a clotting agent. So it uses to heal wounds and things like that, wounds to the tree. But it's actually, people have over the years used it as chewing gum as well. There we go. Okay, and then we need to pick out the darkest middle of the flower. So this is a bit tricky because there isn't really necessarily a darkest middle to the flower, but you need to get your eye to believe that there is. So this is a bit of purple with cobalt green, picking out in the very heart of the flower your darkest greens so that your eye can anchor down there. That's not even dark enough. Let's do, okay, so now I'm using a ultramarine plus a purple, which is my go-to dark. And again, you keep these colours, keep these touches very light. If you go too far, then you end up swamping the whole thing and the whole thing looks all out of focus, which is not what you want. You just want a tiny bit of dark in here to anchor the eye and make it realise that this is the bottom of the anthers and the stamens and so on. That's where they all come from. That should do. Right, last thing to do, again using my go-to shadow, which is this one, cobalt blue plus a purple, a bit more purple, and much more dilute, is to pop in some shadows. I like doing this, but I also hate doing it because it's really scary with white flowers. So I'm going to make it more dilute. You can always go darker, but you cannot go lighter. So drop in that shadow there, shadow there, okay, that helps define down here as well. Out with the stamens. And this needs a bit of a drop shadow. Not a drop shadow, just a shadow, to be honest. Just to show clearly where one element is overlapping another. Again, you don't want to lose too much of your white blossom effect. Let's push this in here, same thing here. And again, use this chance to do more drawing, more crisping up, more fixing of your edges. Every time you put paint on the page, it's another chance. That's rubbish. Every time you put paint on the page, it's another chance to redefine your edges and make things even clearer. There. There. It's easy to overdo it at this stage, so do be careful. Especially if you've got a bit that you haven't drawn very well in the first place, like this flower up here hiding behind the leaf. You don't really want to draw too much attention to it. Now, using the same blue and purple, but this time a bit darker, a bit thicker, I mean, I guess. Whoops. You can hear me mixing it up. And this really is quite thick, to be fair. So I'm going to put in some of my darkest darks. We're very nearly done, ladies and gentlemen. You have been incredibly patient with me. And again, you can use that to help with your edges. Be careful. Don't mess it up now. Tiny bit of the darkest dark there. You're anchoring that eye again. Oh. Darks are very useful. You can use your darkest darks as a way of tricking the eye so that it ends up sticking where you want it to be. So if you want it to be at the centre of the painting, then have quite a few little dark areas just there. It's another of those don't breathe moments. Bit of a bit there. That can only help. But they don't want to overdo it, because if you end up overdoing it, then the shadows have far less effect. They're far less powerful. So this is really finishing stages. So I think, okay, so I think we're done, ladies and gentlemen. Glasses off, cherry blossom down. I think we can say that that's finished. Okay, so just one last little thing is the anatomy of this flower. Oh, you can't really see. Anyway, that there is the pistil that I was talking about, the stigma and the pistil that the pollen burrows down. Here, these are the stamens with the anthers. Here's the leaf, and can you see these? Oh, you can't really see it, so annoying. These little red glands I was wittering on about. 5 petals, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And yeah, it's always important to have scalpel, a hand lens, tweezers, to sort out the anatomy of what you draw, either before you begin or during the process. And actually you can use your drawing to help you learn about what it is that you're examining by seeing it and recording it on paper. So thank you very much for watching me painting the wild cherry blossom and talking about different whites, how to record white flowers onto the page. So there's a pencil line. Easiest is by far putting a piece of leaf behind it, or the paint outline, or the background wash. So I use all of those, and in this piece I've used all of them. So hopefully it gives you a bit of a better idea. Thank you for sticking with me, because I know it's a long-winded process. You're all very brave. If you'd like to see more of my videos, do subscribe to my YouTube channel. I know it's a bit erratic when I post, but I try and get one out every few months. And thanks again for your time, and please do feel free to leave comments. I do appreciate that. And if you'd like to see more of my work, please visit www.lizzieharper.co.uk. I'm sure that I'll be putting this cherry up for sale if anybody wants it, but that will also be on my website. On my website there's an area that says originals for sale. But for now, thank you very much for your time. I hope that it's been useful to you, and do explore the videos by other botanical illustrators, because all of us have issues with white flowers and a lot of us have different solutions. Thank you then. Bye bye.